Call this meeting to order. It is 12:36, and I call to order this meeting of Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board. Today is Thursday, November 9th, 2023. We will have roll call.
Chair Sarah Oakes.
Present.
Martha Gail Reed Lynch.
Present.
Chance Bolton.
Present.
Rolando Castro.
Present.
John Eichelberger.
Present.
Paola Escalante Castillo. Mark McAnally. Stephanie Robinson. And Lisa Sprinkle.
Here. I will hear a motion to excuse the absences of Mr. McAnally, Ms. Robinson, and Ms. Escalante Castillo.
Madam Chair, I would make a motion to excuse the absent board members.
Second. A motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Ms. Reed Lynch. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Move on to agenda item number 3, discussion regarding annual training.
Right, welcome everyone to your annual training. I know.
Wow, get excited.
I know, get pumped. We're here for our annual workshop. Well, I think first and foremost, it's kind of like a look at, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this today? Just moving. All right, so here's our brief agenda for this first item. It's just kind of look at the statutory requirement of the training, go over some of the updates of what's happened with the guide, and then get into one of their topics, which is walking forum, which is part of the open meetings. So get into the why. Why are we here? Why do we have to talk about it? This is, the legislature says why. That's why. The biggest training for you all, I mean, I think when everyone first came on board, you had several trainings, open meetings trainings with the AG's office, and then some other public funds trainings. And we have one within the occupations code that says before you can vote, you have to take a training. And then there's a guide that's created, and you're given this guide annually, and you sign acknowledging receipt. And that's really what the law requires as far as the training requirements. What we do beyond that really is for housekeeping, making sure we're up to date on everything, make sure we're above board with our practices. The other reason we have our training is, you all said so, board policy. We've had a policy since 2014 that says the meeting closest to our November meeting, we have a half-day workshop. And so here we are complying with the policies you all have established. And so with that said, in following the statute, I have an acknowledgement form that I'm going to hand to everybody and make sure you sign. There you go. I'm taking one for you and then giving you pass it around. But if everyone could sign and just leave it at the table, we'll collect that. And I will check my box right here to know that that was me.
This is so exciting. So to the training guide itself, a lot of the content of it is also driven by statute. Talks about relevant laws, the legal schemes, the connection to federal law, general agency information, and then of course your board policies. Not everything under the sun that's going to apply for y'all is in the training guide, but it's pretty comprehensive. It's most everything. So if there's any questions you all have about any aspect of what the board does or anything related, it's always a good start to take a look at the guide. There's lots of good links there. And then always, send me an email if you got any questions. Happy to jump on the call if there's something, a more in-depth conversation you want to have, always happy to have that. As far as what's new to the guide, not really much. This was one of the years where we didn't really update a whole lot of content in the guide. This is what I have here is just sort of a reminder for you all. So I think the guide starts on page 3 of your materials. But things that were really updated were everything at the back of the guide. These are all the policies that you all have updated within this last year. And then the MOU between TALCB. I think it was the last meeting that we changed that policy to one that went from renewing every 2 years
someone that didn't really have an end date, but either TALCB or TREC could make amendments at the next meeting. It's fairly easy to amend as needed. But that's one of the big changes. At the last meeting, we also, you all voted to withdraw some of those old advisory opinions. So it's not that it changed, it's just not in your materials anymore because they're no longer current advisory opinions of the board. And then earlier this year, there was an update to that delegation of authority policy that allowed any sort of the authority that's given to the chair to sign an agreed final order also covers if that order is modified. And all of that also is reflected in our rule language as well. So there's, we're covered in policy and we're covered in rule language for that. But other than that, there wasn't really anything new in the training guide. Does anyone have any questions on any part of the guide? You know, like I said, there's a lot, there's really a lot of layers, a lot of our statutes, the federal.
Can we go through chapter 3 of the guide? No, I'm kidding.
Thank God.
I was ready, you're all ready.
I'm going to the bathroom.
Anyone need that water?
Yeah, exactly.
Hang on, let me throw another top down. Well, well, I got early to the questions line. But if that, I'm going to move on to the open meetings discussion unless anyone has any questions on.
Mhm.
Okay, walking quorum. So this is like a part of a larger concept of our Texas open meetings law. And I think it's helpful to go through some of the key concepts of the open meetings law just to understand how this comes into place and like the interests and the policies that are kind of being served about how this works. So generally speaking, meetings of a governmental body is going to be open to the public. And we like that, you know, you have access to the government, people can see how that sausage is being made. You know, people can be a part of the government, can voice their concerns. It's the public's business. It's about transparency and giving people an opportunity to weigh in. And part of giving people an opportunity to weigh in is our meeting notice requirements. We have to tell people when we're going to meet. We have to tell them where we're going to meet. We can't hide that. And then we have to tell them what we're going to talk about, the content. And that's where our agendas come into play. That's why the language is crafted in a way where it's not too narrow, where if you can start veering off scope a little bit, you create an open meetings dilemma where you haven't given notice of it. But you also can't keep it so broad where you're not actually giving anyone notice. Like you can't just have, you know, some general statement of cleanup. You can't have that. That's not giving anyone any notice. That content requirement is also a time or one of the reasons why, you know, we have that agenda item for open comment on non-posted items. That is one of the times where it's just like, there really isn't an opportunity for you all to deliberate on that because there hasn't been any notice. What's okay is we have our agenda item towards the end of our meeting is always like future meeting items. Like that's kind of the context of when you can talk about that. But as far as weighing in on if someone comes in a public comment, there hasn't been notice on that. And so that's why it's very buttoned up. If you ever watch any other meetings, like it's pretty quick. People say their piece and then they move on and there really isn't any discussion. And that's not because we're trying to offend, it's not trying to offend anybody or it's not important. It's because you all can't talk about it in that context. There hasn't been notice. We haven't told anyone you were going to discuss this. So that's one of the times where if you ever see me grab the mic when someone's up talking and I'm like, well, you know, hey guys, it's me again. You know, we have to probably wrap up this conversation. We probably need to stay within the scope of our agenda.
So tell me, so if someone comes for a public comment and they mention something that none of us have been aware of, you said something about then maybe addressing it later in the future meetings. And so in that, so what would be sort of within the bounds under that agenda item to be able to, would you just say, hey, do we want to explore this further? Is that where you would have that discussion?
Yeah, you can have like, is this something someone could make a motion to add this for a future agenda item, potentially. What you can't ask like factual information. If we had like an existing policy that was specific to what they're asking about, you could potentially, that would probably be a question of me, of like, do we have something on this? And it just be very factual, yes, no. That's sort of the limitation on really deliberating on that.
Okay.
But, you know, you don't have to make a motion. It would be like,
we can consider this later, later on in the agenda, we have an item for potential agenda items, and this could come up. Be as simple as that.
Okay.
Do we have like a public comment policy, like a time limitation on
Yeah, we have a
Is there
specific rule on that. I think it's at least 3 minutes. The thing is we don't very often
You don't
have
need it.
very many people. I mean, I think the 3-minute limitation really comes into play if you've got a lot of people and it's being fair and giving the same amount of time, everybody the same opportunity.
Yeah.
But, if it's, and that's also at the discretion of the chair. If she wanted to give more time, you could, but you'd have to give everybody more time.
Okay.
But that it's within rule to answer your question. And that's something pretty typical of governmental bodies.
Yeah,
to
we have them for my clients, which is why I was wondering, yeah.
So we talked about date, time, location. You have to tell them where, when, and what we're talking about, and then a quorum. Who can tell me what a quorum of 9 members would be? A majority of members would be 5.
Go.
5 is the magic number that should, make your tummy hurt. If you think you have too many folks on an email, it's that magic number of 5. Always remember that number.
And the school board members in Southlake actually went to jail for this, so don't think that it doesn't happen. And
We'll
the
get
last
into to some of those.
Oh, we'll get this. Okay.
Okay. So we talked about some of the general sort of concepts of open meeting statutes. I'm going to talk a little bit about what a meeting is. So within the open meetings law, there's 2 definitions that are provided by the Open Meetings Act. This first one is a deliberation between a quorum of a governmental body or between a quorum of a governmental body and another person, during which public business or public policy over which the body has supervision or control is discussed or considered, or during which the governmental body takes formal action. So we're looking at this definition. Let me throw some hypotheticals with this, or key points. Quorum, we talked about 5, a majority of you all. Let's talk about the content. You need to be talking about public business over which you have supervision or control. So related to appraisers, related to AMCs. Our statute doesn't give us control over other license types, over plumbers. So that's the topic that is narrowed, which it is a meeting of a governmental body if that is the subject matter. And then we talk about if something is discussed, considered, or you take formal action. So I've got kind of a couple hypotheticals. So what if 4 of you are talking about residential appraiser licenses? Would that be a meeting within the definition? No, there's only 4. Okay. What if there are 5 of you and you're talking about the mayoral race in Belton, Texas? Would that be covered? Because not anything you have jurisdiction or control over. What if there's 5 of you, you're talking about appraiser license types, but there's no motion, you don't vote? Is that still a meeting? All right, everyone's straight A's, flying colors for everybody. All right. This is the second definition of a meeting in the open meeting statute. That basically says, unless we say otherwise, a gathering that is conducted by the governmental body or for which the governmental body is responsible, at which a quorum of the members of the governmental body are present, that has been called by the governmental body, and at which members receive information from, give information to, ask questions, or receive questions from any third person, including an employee of the governmental body, about the public business or public policy over which the governmental body has supervision or control. So just like the other definition, there's still that quorum requirement. It talks about a gathering. There's sort of location or everyone at a location at once component. It's called by the governmental body, and it still has that same public business, public policy, subject matter implications. The big difference between the 2 definitions that I see is that deliberation is missing from this one. Deliberation, another word for deliberation is discussion, essentially. So here, you guys don't even have to talk. You just have to be there at the same time and listen to somebody saying something that has something to do with the area of law that you govern. That's all it takes. You don't have to say anything. And so those are the 2
big definitions of a meeting. Does anyone have any questions? I think with this one, this is where we can get into trouble with committee meetings. If somehow, this is why you can't just attend another committee meeting and make 5, even though you're not participating, you're just listening. It doesn't matter. Under this definition, that's a meeting under the statute. And we don't notice our committee meetings like we do our big open meetings meetings. So does anyone have any questions? I'm going to move on to things that are exceptions to meetings being open to the public. There's specific circumstances where you can meet and not have it be open to the public. Typically, it's our executive sessions, and there's pretty specific subject matters that we can cover within those that make that okay. We talk about pending and anticipated and pending litigation. And the policy reasons behind that is like strategy. It's the same reason that any attorney-client privilege in general is just having that private conversation with an attorney. And then certain personnel matters, and then legal advice again. And that also too is, limited to something that's in a posted agenda item. So we can't talk about something that, that wasn't on the agenda. It can't there needs to be some connection to that legal advice to make the closed session, executive session okay. And then, we have our specific item on our meetings for executive session, but we can go in at any time. If something comes up later in the meeting, not at that time, we could go in if we needed to. So if, we don't always have executive session, but something happens after the fact, it's fine that we go ahead and have one if you all need legal advice, that's okay. Okay. Next one. All right, not meeting meetings. Our committee meetings are typically not meetings. There's 3 of y'all on our committees, and then Sarah, Madam Chair, she usually attends as well. That usually makes 4. There's times that I think other committees might interest you, a committee that you're not on, and there's ways that we can work around that. Sarah's often mentioned, like, I'm fine not attending if there's something particular that someone wants to be involved in or be in on the discussion. We could work something out that way. And if we had to potentially notice another meeting outside of that quarterly schedule, but we would just need some preparation and some time to make sure that we're doing that correctly. So that's just something to keep in mind if there's ever that desire to attend, and for you all, the reason now why you can't just go and attend one without bit notice. Other community.
How would that work with, let's say you record the committee meeting and other board members could potentially watch it or not, or?
I mean, it's after the fact. I think it's that temporal, you're not watching it, you're not there in real time.
Discussion, but you can still see the content.
Yeah, but I mean, are you talking about after the fact?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine, because it's really after the fact. There isn't anything that isn't that gathering at the same time. I think the kind of exceptions to that is the walking quorum where it's happening piecemeal, but there's also the intent to do it that way to get around having the meeting. But does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am.
Can I just mention a story? I was, we love it.
Tell us.
I was in a bank downtown and had just come from a meeting. And I'm on the elevator and 2 lawyers are talking about a case. My attorney that I worked for was on the other side. And I went back to the office and I said, "You're never gonna believe what I heard on the elevator." So just be cautious of getting on the elevator with a bunch of people like all of us. And you just shouldn't be talking about anything having to do with appraisers. It made a big difference in the case I was on. So.
Yeah.
Huzzah.
Yeah.
Good job.
Good for you.
That's true of like airplanes.
I didn't say a
too.
word.
I've heard that
Yes.
story on airplanes, and you're just the whole flight, you just
Yes.
hear it all. And
Yes. Exactly.
That's why you watch movies.
Yeah, it's funny. Get your charge, get your Netflix, get all that, and just watch that. That's right. So we talked about committee meetings. I've written down other communications of less than a quorum. Like, it's fine for you to have one-on-one emails.
chair about something, just be mindful of that numbers or a phone call, one-on-one, that's always fine. It's when, we'll talk about it into the walking quorum a little later where that becomes problematic, but, just communications are fine, less than a quorum. I've got informal social meetings, we all just had lunch, there's a bunch of us in here, we're not, as long as we're not talking about public meetings or public business, that's fine. Holiday parties, we all have flies and gets together, might have common friends. I know appraisers all know each other, you all are at like a 1 degree of separation, if not, know everything. But informal gatherings, these are non-meeting meetings, so long as we don't start talking about public business, that's all fine. All right, so let's get into walking quorum, and I'm using the specific statute that covers it to kind of guide me here. And it's referred to as like prohibited series of communications. It prohibits discussion of item of public business among a quorum through a series of communications. So it's not just one place at one time, it's a series, it's happening piecemeal, but if you put them all together, it's wrong. You don't need to be. It's a quorum and you created a meeting. So here is a statute, a piece of the statute. Member of the governmental body commits an offense if the member, we had written down or underlined, knowingly engage in at least one communication among a series of communications that each occur outside of a meeting authorized by this chapter. And it concerns, again, within the jurisdiction of the governmental body. It's the topic that what you're discussing that's important. And then, each individual communication is less than a quorum, but when you put them all together, it becomes a series of communications that constitutes a quorum. And then there's a knowledge component, or at the time that what you're doing is part of a series. Either it's the first one or it's the last one, or there's something in there in the discussion where it's just like, okay, this is an ongoing discussion. This is what should make skin prickle and give you a tummy ache and anxiety a little bit. Because all this, when you add it up, it ends up being deliberation once, later on, or not here at the bottom, the knowing component, you knew at the time, and that it would involve a quorum, and then it would be a quorum deliberating. Next slide. This is the consequences, the offense. You mentioned some jail time for folks, confinement in a county jail for not less than 1 month or more than 6 months, and then fine not less than 100 or more than 500 or both. And what's not in the statute is sort of the public opinion component of it, your reputation, your credibility. That's doesn't need to be in there, but it's basically in every one of these. So the kind of key example that's given for a walking quorum is this case that's called Esperanza Peace and Justice Center versus the City of San Antonio. And so it was the day before city council meeting, and there were several small meetings, smaller groups that met with the city manager in his office a little bit at a time. So it's small groups coming in. Meanwhile, the mayor is on the phone with members. Some said they thought they were on speakerphone. I think there's 11 members in the governmental body, so a quorum would be 6. And the claim, the defense that they gave was sort of just like, we're just trying to reach a consensus on changes to a budget because they, quote, wanted for the budget to avoid, quote, a whole bunch of amendments from the floor that would take lots of time, take up lots of time. So, I mean, it could be innocent motivations, but the statute, law, none of that doesn't really take that into account. They don't really care. And then my last bullet, they made efforts to avoid a physical quorum. In the case, they talked about how, the city manager would sort of pause and be like, hey, we've got too many people in here. Can y'all go sit outside? So they'd go out and sit in the reception area while another batch would come in, and they just sort of worked out amendments. And, this case, the open meetings component was only a small piece of the case because this group that filed the suit, they were the ones sort of, their funding was eliminated because of this action, and they wasn't clear on the record why they were targeted, and so there was a whole lot of other violations. But if that is true as far as like the claimed purpose, it would take up a bunch of time. But they could have what we're doing right now is a workshop. We're in a meeting, we're having kind of open, free discussions. That's something they could have done. If you don't want a bunch of those amendments, it's like talk a little bit about it beforehand, like narrow it down a little bit. You're still in a public meeting, it's open, you're in compliance with the act. You didn't have to do it that way, but this is how it comes up. And so the folks being affected by it, it's sort of, it makes your actions voidable or void what you do during a meeting. And that's sort of aside from the bad press. It looks bad. You know, don't be someone else's hypothetical in their PowerPoint to their governmental body for their training. That's always, I've had clients that have been footnotes in cases, and it always, well, this is before they were my client. But it's always like, that's that case, that tells you that one legal principle, and my footnote client is in that case. And so don't be a footnote. Yeah.
Nice.
So just things to keep in mind. You know, you get emails from us. Don't hit reply all. Just don't do it. I think oftentimes you probably get emails from me and you're blind copied, so that's not even an option for you. If I do send an email of just kind of general information. Watch your email chain. Sometimes you can't tell you don't know who's been on an email chain until you actually scroll down and look who's been on the chain. That magic number 5, it can happen very quickly, very innocently, and just miscounting or not counting yourself. That can happen we talked about attending different committee meetings. You know, there's ways that we can accommodate you and still be within the Open Meetings Act. And then also emails from the public. I know, you know, folks try to reach out to everybody. They'll email everybody, or you don't know if maybe they've emailed you all separately or emailed a few, but you may not know it's a quorum. I mean, there's things that you may not intend, but there might be enough that's out there that looks like proof to prove up all these elements. Like sometimes, you know, at the end of the day at law school, you look at a case, it's like, well, they wouldn't have won. They couldn't prove causation. It doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be proven or disproven before it's a problem. And so watch out for emails from the public. That's why it's always, you know, our advice is always like filter that through staff, send it to staff, because not just public open meetings considerations, there's also ex parte considerations. You don't know if it's a pending case. You don't know if there's a pending complaint. And there's certain things that you do if something's pending that could impact the end result of the case that you have like no intention to do, but it's just what someone could prove, what someone could point at as, you know, saying that like, well, you know, they decided my case based on something that wasn't on the record. It was this email. You see, they already didn't like what I said, or they already didn't like that. It's just avoiding that. So best practice is always forward that to me, the staff, for us to handle, because, you know, this is also part of that division of policymaking, administrative functions. Just send it our way and we'll make sure that we won't run into any of these open meetings issues or ex parte issues. Okay, different forms of communication. I bring this up as like mix of phone call, mix of text, mix of email. It doesn't matter if it's all these different types. It doesn't stop it from being a quorum if you're making a phone call here, email there, in person there. It all counts towards it being a quorum. And then conversation breaks, our meetings, you know, just, it's easy to get very comfortable talking about, you know, we talk about the shift back into work from our personal lives. So I say, keep it grandkids, keep it vacation, keep it non-public related things between breaks, before meetings or after meetings. All right, and then additional resources that are available to you. I don't know if you all may or may not have looked at it, but the Attorney General's office publishes these handbooks on specific topics that are very helpful. They do one on open meetings, they do one on public information, and they do one on administrative law specifically. And they're all similar to how our board member training guides are. It's like very comprehensive, not everything, but it's a pretty good resource. And they're already pretty like a narrowed down topic if it's just on open meetings. But and they're the ones charged with enforcing the statute. So they're the experts on this. But and then again, if you've all taken that open meetings training video before you became votable, if there's ever any doubt, that's a fairly, I think it's a quick video. I want to say it's less than 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes. If there's ever any questions, another resource if you want to go back and take a look at that. Does anyone have any questions?
We can just call you though if we have a
Yes.
question that's sensitive.
One every time. Yes, please call.
Okay,
Well, that's all I had on walking forum. I'm ready to shift to sort of the forms policy discussion unless anyone has any questions or anything.
Questions? I think we're good.
All right, I don't have a slide for you all, but I will shift to the workshop materials. Let's see, hold on. Okay. So the review of the TALCB forms policy, this is sort of the sub item in this, and I'm sort of structured this way because our forms policy is in the training guide at the back. It's one of the policies, I believe on page 95 of your training materials, your board materials.
yes.
So this is, oh, and before I move on to the forms guide, on page 94, this is this nice sort of one pager on open meetings that Summer Mandel worked on for you all, just sort of a nice little reference just to kind of keep everything in mind on page 94, an additional resource that I failed to mention. So moving on to our forms policy. So this was an item, well, first you'll see that there's an item on today's agenda on the forms policy, but there's also one for tomorrow. For today, like what I had in mind is sort of just a discussion on the topic, no formal action since it's just a discussion item, and then help, narrow down the discussion ideally for tomorrow as far as the forms policy. So a little bit of motivation why staff has asked this item to be on the agenda to kind of reform our forms policy. I think the biggest impetus is talking to Melissa with the RAMP project that we've talked about, our licensing project. It's kind of come up more often where, we're moving to more online applications. We're making sure that we're looking at our forms before we try to replicate something in the new licensing system. It's not about just replicating. We want to make sure it's right, make sure it's correct, make sure it's accurate without replicating a mistake. And so it's kind of come up where we've looked at forms and there's something that needs to be changed. It might have been based on a law or a rule, but it's so far removed from time that I don't think it fits squarely within our policy for us to go ahead and change it without it going through the board. And then with the RAMP project, with the tailoring sessions that we're having, there's sort of been a need to act more quickly than within our quarterly board meeting schedule because, developers need to start developing or we need to make other plans, and then to go back and try to change course later becomes more time consuming, more money. And so with that, it's sort of discussions with Melissa and I with is there a way to kind of reform our forms policy that allows us to act quickly, but still maintains policymaker oversight over what's being put forth. I went back and I looked at our policy and sort of the motivation behind that. So I kept all this in mind with the revised language. One, in revising it, so the old policy starts on page 95 and the draft that I've made starts on page 97. And it's a little bit more streamlined, I think, in my opinion, of it's a little more clear what would come before the board. So basically, it's more of a process of staff would have authority to make any sort of minor technical non-substantive changes as needed. Anything beyond that, staff could make, but it would need to be brought to the next board meeting to ratify. And so that's similar to how we do board meeting minutes. There's always that item of ratifying the minutes of the prior meeting to make any changes if necessary, but otherwise it should be good to go. And this is sort of the happy medium I kind of came up with to be more expedient with taking action with modifying a form, but also giving you all an opportunity to weigh in and see what's being done. And it's not just, you don't know that it's been changed, or you don't know why it's been changed, and it just sort of exists until it comes up again later. But there would be an opportunity for you all to weigh in. And so when, in talking about that technical non-substantive change, that's really the same as the old policy. That was already in the old policy. I think this actually gives you all a little bit more oversight, because the way the old policy is written is if it's based on a change in statute, there wasn't a mechanism that would come before you all to change it.
So how was it done before February 2019 when this policy was written?
I'm not really sure. I think it was every single thing
Everything
went to
came
the
before the
board,
board.
and that was already sort of problematic as far as efficiency, any change.
Y'all, do any of you old members remember this discussion?
More seasoned.
Vaguely, yes. I remember that.
Okay.
Yeah, but and I think, what they're saying is that like every change to a form, like we had to go through and the board would vote on it.
We had longer meetings.
We had a lot.
Is there any language about this in statute or rules? Because to me, forms in general would be something that I don't see why the board members, the policymakers would even need to be involved in forms at all. So this all feels strange to me to begin with. I mean, we're not giving y'all feedback on what goes on the website, which is, it's like that, y'all handle that. So why are we involved in this anyway?
I think the older policy is just a reflective of a different time.
Yeah.
And then I think, before the older policy, that was at its time, and then it shifted again to have a little less board touch points on the specific forms. And then here now with us moving to, it's just sort of evolved to.
Yeah.
Couldn't we have just some like generic board policy of, you have the authority to make forms, they can't be racist, they can't be, whatever, all these, whatever the things that are, we don't want them to be. But, and then, that just seems like work that the board really doesn't need to do.
100%. Right.
I do like the board ratifying after you, in the past, you've made some suggestions for new forms and so on and so forth. And that helps us to see the changes that were made and do they benefit the government side and the public side. So I like the ratification part. I want to leave it there. Sorry, that's
No.
my opinion.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Want to hear all things. But I think you made a good point, is that we're not ratifying the forms that are on the website, are we?
Essentially it's the
most-
same
I think
information.
most every form has at some point been approved by you all, unless it's been changed.
I think
because
what
of-
he's saying is if I'm renewing, I can go paper form, which is something that we at this point are ratifying, or you can go electronic, which is essentially mirroring the same information, but it's like,
There are times though when it's not like exact, right?
Yeah.
There are times where.
right, so,
But we've had board meetings where we tell them, we would like to see that on
absolutely,
the website, and then they do it.
yeah.
So,
But that's not something that they changed, it's something that we've suggested
Right.
and then they changed.
right,
So this one would be, they take care of it and then we
right,
ratify.
and that's
like you
where
were
I
saying.
like the
Right.
ratification.
That's
So, just to make sure we don't go back to the old days.
Well, I just remember in the past meetings, years ago, that when Kristen was here, we had tons and tons of things that was given to us, and it was a change of the A, the D, the N, the I. There was minutia, tons of it, that it was seemingly to me, a small mind, that we were changing all kind of stuff that was meaningless.
Yeah.
It was just a total waste of everybody's time.
Well, and that's sort of my thought on this is that, I definitely felt, for those of you who weren't here, the board meetings used to be 6 and 8 hours long. And I felt like the intent maybe of previous leadership was that they were overwhelming the board members with minutia so that they then didn't have time to focus on the things that really
The
needed to be
really
focused on.
important.
And that's why we got into the situation that we were in. And so that has been a lot of the reason why I've cut out so many things, trying to be efficient, but also so that we are paying attention to the big important things. And we aren't bogged down with the A's and the B's and those types of things. And
There was a
so,
lot of that.
so I think, Lisa, I like the idea of oversight. I don't want to, again, add it. And are we just going to go like, agenda item number 24 is ratifying the changes to the form, and everybody just goes, yeah, and it just adds another thing? Or do
they
you think that
present it?
having it in the packet is going to sort of compel us all to look at it and
Right.
just
Well,
give us?
that's
Before
the way-
ratification?
That's the way it's been.
Okay.
Mhm.
And so that when we get into the board meeting, we can all say aye, and there's no amendments. And if we have a question about it
Mhm.
before the meeting, we can call. We can find out, did you mean this, or,
Right, okay. Yeah, because I don't think we need to spend time necessarily with them explaining all the things.
Oh,
We just
no.
put them in there and say, does anybody have any questions about? Does that seem like a more?
I mean, I think that's a lot of the same ratification, in the same way as we have like dismissals. I mean, it's there for you to see and comment on, but
Right.
unless something comes up, then that will be the form that will live on. So,
like you've explained at meetings, this is why we changed it, and this is how we changed it, and so on and so forth. And we've all had it
Uh-huh,
ahead of time.
right.
And so, yeah, we can just, it's an agenda item, but it's very quick.
Right,
Yeah,
we could
and
maybe
you're not
even
bogged
put it
down.
after the minutes of, ratification of the minutes, ratification of any changes to the forms in the last.
We also do the agency operations report, so would it be helpful if anytime we made a form change for that month, we can include a link to it there so you can
That's
see
the
it?
thing I send out to you every month.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could include it in that. It's not an issue. And then
Yeah,
you
that
guys-
would be helpful.
Beforehand, and
so it's just,
Yeah,
object if
are
we,
you fine with staff? I mean, with that, to shift the policy towards staff has authority to establish forms, but reported with the staff reports as they're generated? I mean, is that?
Yeah, I think that's.
Understanding?
okay.
I mean, I think,
That's awesome, thank you guys.
Yeah, because I think regardless of whether you ratify it or not, if there's an issue with something, you can obviously.
yeah, I think a board member should be able to raise an objection,
Yeah.
and
Well,
then we can
that's-
bring it down for review.
that's, the
Right.
ratification process presumes that you're gonna be fine with it, but in that process, you could also be like, I move to ratify it with X changes. That's what kind of I had in mind with that. But if y'all are comfortable delegating that to staff, but still know that that's gonna be included, if that's the fine middle ground for y'all, I'm happy to present it tomorrow when y'all can take action on it.
Okay.
And I think I would also have some judgment and this is probably something that they'd want to see and weigh in on if it's something more serious, and then I would bring it to a committee.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what on the forms would be, to the
So
point of,
substantial that-
right, it's just your name, your address, there's just not. I will say.
Write an essay as to why you want to be the library.
Ugh.
I will say that I did download the form for renewal. I was looking for the paper one because I'm not ready to go through the electronic part. And I thought the fact that we don't separate out that the ASC gets $80 out of that total, I think that's probably something that's important because it sort of took me an hour to figure that out. Because I was like, wait, why is this isn't what we charge? And then I was like, well, the $40, okay. So it really did take me, somebody who knows.
You're talking about the
my way
registry
around.
fee?
The registry?
Yeah, it's just in the, on the paper form, it just says whatever the total is. So it's everything. And so then it makes it look like TLCB is getting, $600 or $700 or whatever it is. And I'm like, well, that's not our fee, and then of course, okay, the ASC registry fee, which had completely slipped my mind,
Yeah.
why are they charging us $40? And why haven't they reduced it to $0? That's another question, but,
That's
We're getting back
outside
to
of our
grants.
scope.
so do we even really, do we need to make a new policy? I sort of feel like a policy is something that is either clarification or can we just rescind the policy or do we need to?
I mean, that's an option to rescind it. I mean, I think it is. It's as long as, but it's, for me, it's always nice to point to something to know. I mean, that's something that I think like SOPs, right? Is that where you would put Melissa internally for us to know that that's how we're handling it?
Uh-huh.
And I think policies help future board members too,
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
have something to point to.
Yeah.
I mean, a policy could be as simple as, the board delegates authority to staff to develop forms, any new forms that are created, staff will include.
Yeah, and maybe
staff
because
reports.
the board had to ratify them for so long, maybe it makes sense to have a policy so that, somebody in 10 years from now is like, why did this change at some point? Yeah. Although in 10 years, will we have paper forms? Okay, then does that sound like a plan?
That sounds good.
And I will make that preparation for tomorrow so I'm clear. Was it not having a policy?
I think changing.
Changing the
the
policy to reflect what we discussed about agency staff reports would, okay.
Yeah, that's.
So speaking of policies, like there's a policy in here from whenever, 2012, that is no longer applicable. Do we,
Are you talking about the AMC one? That one's on the agenda tomorrow also.
to
Potentially
To
streamline and remove.
right, it was just like, this is a stopgap between,
Yeah.
and that happened.
I think if you know, some of the policies I've written, I've also added the language at the end that's like until superseded by rule or something else, so that you don't, even
Right, because that's still kind
if
of.
you forget to repeal it, then you know that, okay, there's a rule that covers it specifically. It sounds like it's gonna supersede this
Yeah,
policy.
okay.
But yeah, I'm glad you noticed that because it is on the agenda for tomorrow, because it is already obsolete.
So when they do say that, it says the policy is effective as of and remains into effect until it's been changed or revoked. So that means that it just sort of hangs out there and if it was changed or revoked, then it's no longer like part of our training or part of our manual guide.
It wouldn't be a current policy. It
Okay.
would be like a former policy.
Okay, so yeah, I was kind of wondering, like, are we seeing it because it's still in effect?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that one's.
So when they are superseded or changed or by the board rule or whatever, does it just go away? Or do
If you like, for example, the advisory opinions, they're not in the packet anymore because you all withdrew them. They're not active, so they're not included. So if it's been revoked, it's going to be removed from the board training guide. And if it's superseded, it'll be the most up-to-date one that's applicable.
I also have a question on the policy on page 74. That's the one where 2013, we started posting videos of the board meetings, and it says that the board secretary will approve this official record prior to posting it on the agency. Is that still happening? Does
Yeah,
the board
that's
secretary-
our ratification of the minutes item.
So the secretary approves them so they get posted, and then you ratify them.
The August meeting doesn't get posted until tomorrow.
It's posted. This is kind of that same process I was proposing with. It's live, it's been approved by the secretary,
Oh,
and
okay.
it's posted. When you get to the next board meeting,
So
you
you-
ratify it.
When you were board secretary, you got that before,
Yeah,
just
that-
independently of you.
Dion would send me a message saying they're up, take a look at them, and I would take a look at them and send her an email, say the minutes are approved.
Awesome. I just wanted to make sure that was still happening. So-
And really, since we've been doing the video thing, it's, the content is there. It's just a matter to make sure that she's noted, like the notation is correct and who made what motions or
And
whatever.
that really should all be correct by the time you get a chance, because it's
Yeah.
Dion who's got it all, and then
Yeah.
It's so awesome to be able to just
There's
click on those.
never one time that I
links.
went, that is completely false.
Like, where was I?
I step out when this was being.
Yeah.
No, so yeah, it's a very easy process.
Okay, very good. Just wanted to make sure that was still happening. Okay.
Any other questions on the board policy? Board training guide?
Nope. Does that conclude agenda item number 3? Okay, agenda item number 4 is status update on the appraisal subcommittee grant funds. We were hoping that there would be something to talk about today, but
Nope. So far, no notice of funding. And I think Renata might be able to say this more eloquently than me, but I think part of the reason is the federal government not figuring out their budget, their long-term budget, because the ASC grant funds would be tied to that sort of act. I think what's been approved thus far has been sort of more shorter and temporal,
What a surprise.
temporary measure in funding.
Yeah.
Did I say that?
Absolutely. So basically, the federal government is under a continuing resolution act until November 17th. That's when they have to come together again, decide if they're going to pass the official budget or if they're gonna basically, kick the can down the road and extend it till December 31st.
Anybody want to take any bets?
But essentially, until the federal government.
Here, you can use this can.
They can't issue any grants because the funding under CR is to do, basically keep the lights on. It's for mandatory things. A grant would be considered discretionary funding.
okay, so even though it's money that the ASC has, they just still can't. And so along those same lines, we still can't get guidance on what they will approve once.
I think that means they do that at the same time or like they outline.
So how does that impact the agency?
Well, we haven't been able to get grant funds since they didn't have a grant director and
Oh, I know, I get that, but what's the impact on us not having that money?
well, it's been between $150,000 and $200,000 a year for the last several years. So there's that.
So what is that not funding?
Oh, yeah, I think we've been able to turn the funding that we had for a staff position is now fully funded by us in our regular funds. And we have spent the other grant funds on the computer web and things that,
The
right?
SharePoint developer for the complaints portal and everything.
Okay, so basically, it's not fun that we're not getting this, but we're doing okay. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it's not going to, be a hindrance to our operations or anything that we already have programmed into something. If we get it, great. If we don't, then
Yeah, so,
We're
but
not
so
upgrading
staff,
anything.
we're not letting anybody go or anything.
no, sir.
Okay,
No, sir. And then, Melissa, I think you had brought up that they had made a change, like in their verbiage, like it was saying like they were gonna let us know in October, then they made it more broad and ambiguous that they would let us know sometime in
As soon
the
as
first
possible.
quarter of 2024. So until they have a budget pass, I think they're not gonna give us a definite date on when we can see the funds.
I think the thing that is going to put on pause is we were talking about possible scholarship funding for Appraiser and things like that. So it's just the things that we want to do are going to be paused for a moment.
Well, it's still in the
Yeah,
beginning
Limbo.
stages anyway, so.
still in the limbo land.
So that's.
And the ASC has said that this is why the grant program is essentially on pause.
I don't think they're really saying why. I don't think they
I don't think they've said specifically why, but we've noticed the change in their language that they've communicated from being, oh, we're gonna let you guys know in October, which would have been the beginning of the federal fiscal year.
Right.
So now it's more broad. We're gonna let you guys know something, hopefully by December 31st, which is the end of Q1 of 2024. So
Can-
give a little time.
Can we just check in with them and make sure? Because my understanding was always that they were a quasi whatever, they're not funded by general revenue. So I sort of thought that they had more flexibility than that. But, not that it matters, but it does, right? Because they hired their new staff in July and they're hoarding all this money.
That was a big part of conversation at Arrow.
Yeah,
States wanting to know when the notice of funding was going to be released,
interesting.
and they didn't have an answer.
So they didn't have an answer?
Oh, they would say December or later this quarter, but they didn't say why it was being held up. They just said that they're still working through things. Soon was soon.
But I feel like it's a federal agency and there are 50 or 55 of us that they oversee, and there should be some accountability there, right? Like we should be able to get these questions answered. It's the money that we're sending to you.
Well, yeah.
What's going on with it? I don't think that that's an outrageous ask of us, is it? That we hold a federal agency accountable to those of us that are funding it, right? So you can tell them that I'm just that asked.
Got it.
We'll get an IRS audit in the future.
Yeah, really.
This is being recorded because now that will be my defense.
Wait. What?
I do have a copy of their slides from Arrow if you are curious to see them. I can pull them up on the screen.
Yeah.
There's only 4 of them and one of them is a cover page, but it does have bullet points. If I can figure out how to do it. Here they have their target release date remains end of FY Q1. This is their budget. And we're in good shape with our SAM's number and everything. But
Any federal entity has a budget of only $2 million.
It's crazy, right?
and so I think that one piece of information, that's right. They're open to practicum and career type projects, but they still need I think they're just like, you need to look at the notice of funding to know for sure. It needs to be within that. There's 15 states currently receiving grants.
It's never changed.
And they've got a couple more positions.
Are we fully, we've gotten all of the grant money that it's all done at this point, right? Like we have nothing outstanding.
That is correct. We have received $461,000 and we've expended all $461,000.
Right. So when they say they have 15 states, when is the last time that we were even able to apply for grants? So I would imagine nobody's receiving any money right now, right? It's been long enough that they've been.
I mean, I guess it might also depend when they expended those funds, right? For each state.
Okay. Okie dokie. So we don't have much left.
It's accruing interest.
You would hope. Let's hope right now
High
it's accruing a
savings.
lot of interest,
Mm-hmm.
although I don't have a lot of faith in it. Okay, so nothing else on the. Okey-dokey. Okay, this moves us to agenda item number 5, the review of the Pearson View candidate handbook. And the reason I put this on the workshop agenda is because we've talked about this a lot over the years when we've talked about the exam pass rates and that sort of thing. The question has come up many times about the study guides and what the appraisers are seeing before they take this exam. And so we've talked about this specific document a lot, but we've never seen it. And so I really just included it because I wanted it to be in our materials and available so that if and when the conversation comes back up again, that we still have access to this document.
Okay.
Because we were all kind of like, is what they're seeing before the test not sufficient? You know, could that be part of it? And so now we have a copy of it. And so that's the only reason.
And since we're not providing one ourselves.
Right,
To the.
right, that's right.
Yeah.
As we should be per statute. Wait, did we get that changed?
No,
We
we
got
got that
it
changed.
We got it changed, yeah.
Yeah, we changed it.
Okay.
remember that.
Did anybody have any questions on that on that handbook? Okay, so it's just there for future reference. Agenda item number 6, demonstration of the Appraisal Institute Perea program.
Why did somebody not come back?
I was close to leaving. I signed my form. I was
Yeah,
on.
there you go.
Yeah, I turned it in.
It's time to go.
See ya.
So we're on to agenda item number 7. Discussion regarding the 2022 annual report of the appraisal subcommittee. And I asked for this to be on the agenda again because it starts on page 116 in our documents. Again, just because, you know, they are our federal oversight agency, and I think it's important that we kind of just keep tabs on what's happening with them, especially because of the, you know, the vast amount of money that they have accumulated in the last few years. In 2019, their total assets were 10 million, and in 2022, you can see on page 157 is their balance sheet. Their assets are 28 million. So that's $18 million in 3 years that they have accumulated. And this is because of the AMC registry fees, which are, for whatever reason, Dodd-Frank put it in statute that it would be $25 per appraiser per AMC. So if you're on 7 of AMC's approved appraiser list, each one of them are paying $25 for you to the federal government. We collect it and then pass it on. We don't keep any portion of it. We pass it on to the federal government or to the ASC. And so there's been, to my understanding, there's been a bill or bills that have tried to change that $25 because they clearly see it doesn't cost them that amount of money to run the program. In fact, they don't, to my knowledge, don't do anything. There's, they're like, the ASC oversees the AQB and the standards board, which produces UPAC. So there's actual things they're doing for appraisers, but I don't think there's anything they're doing for AMCs. And so, just as that relates to us as being regulated by a federal agency that is overflowing with money that, I just think that that's important for us to be aware of. On one of her slides, Kat's slides earlier, it showed that their budget this year was $2 million. So again, that puts it in perspective that their total assets are $28 million. And I
Must be nice.
I get the sense that, even I read these reports pretty thoroughly, and over the years, it feels like the transparency has definitely gone down. So like the first 2 years they had the grant program, in this yearly report, they would have a table and it would show all the states that were receiving it and all the money. And then they did that again the second year. And then this year, it's just like, oh, we've given $3 million to 15 states and here are the 15 states. It feels like they're starting to get a little bit operating a little differently. And so the fact that they started collecting this money and then it took them a really long time to find a grants director. Then they found a grants director and that's how we got the 3 years of grants that we got. And then that grants director quit and it took them a really long time to find another grants director. And then also I think they had a replacement of their general counsel or something. And so that happened, 7 months ago or something. And then we're getting this sort of runaround again about all this money. It's like, you have the money, you don't have anything to do with it. And it feels like you're not trying to, kind of give it back, which just makes me nervous as being under their purview. So just wanted to kind of bring that to everybody's and for us to make sure that we keep an eye on that as well as the years go by. So, I don't think that there was anything else on that. In that I wanted to kind of point out, but just, it's kind of worth the read a little bit, little sections of it that talk about their budget and that sort of thing. And just kind of, if you have any questions, then I think that you should definitely ask them, because I think that it's our job to keep our eyes open. Does anybody have any questions on the ASC's? Okay, so we will ask them for more clarification on the grant program, and then I think that all we have left is future agenda items, future workshop agenda items. So we did have the policy that we would, that was written in maybe 2019. No, maybe 2014. 2014.
Workshops.
About the workshops. Is that something that we want to revisit? Do we want to require a workshop statutorily? We just have to have some sort of training, right?
Statutorily is you get your training guide, you receive it, review it, sign your receipt and give it back to me.
Yeah.
The only thing about, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not a huge fan of these workshops,
Right.
but I also at the same time understand, particularly for new board members coming on, at least it's a forum to be able to ask some questions.
That's a really great point. Because I do feel like, Lisa, don't you think the first workshops that we attended were kind of like, okay, let's ask all the questions that we.
Well, I remember going into that first board meeting and y'all were using initials for everything. And I was writing to Clint, I think, was sitting next to me. And I'm going, what's, this and what's that and it was a little overwhelming. And I still don't have them all down.
Well, there was a lot going on.
Yeah, there was a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I walked in right before we hired Chelsea and I
Yeah.
know there was
Yeah.
turmoil and all of that. But I don't think we should
Change it.
maybe do it every year.
Every other year seemed like a good one to me. I was just thinking the same thing.
Because I enjoyed last year's. We talked about providing more education availability, and we talked about appraisers in real estate in the high school level and the junior college. And I know Chelsea had a different viewpoint on that because she didn't feel it was our job for education, but that was a very interesting discussion. And I know when Stephanie was here, there was talk about bias and appraisals and that kind of thing. So I think that was good, but I'm not sure every year
Yeah.
is advantageous.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way, but I also don't want to put it, I definitely don't want to say up to the chair's discretion or the executive committee's discretion. Because I think then I would sort of, as the chair, I would feel like, I'm taking up another work day, and if that's up to me, I don't want to do that to my, fellow board members. So
But there is a way for you to contact all of us and find out if we have ideas for a workshop. We will designate November as the workshop month if there's enough
Interest.
or if there's something going on, or,
Vote on it.
yeah. Do we hold
The
it?
board meeting, are we gonna hold it this year or not? We have enough topics to discuss.
Right.
well, because,
Or would that be voted on in the meeting right before that, or to give us some?
but I also don't, if Stephanie's like, I really want to dig into the budget, but I'm the only one voting for everyone to have to come in a day early, I don't want to sort of put that on anybody individually, because I think then they would default to not, inconveniencing anyone. So I don't want it to. What about if we did at least every other year? November, so it could be every year, it would be the day before the November board meeting, at least every other year.
And if there is a new member, it really needs.
Well, whenever there's a new member, I schedule a one-on-one and kind of go through everything with.
Oh, that's
in
true.
there.
That's
And I make sure that we're.
Yeah, because we didn't have that.
That's good
I
because
didn't have any.
we didn't have any of that.
So, yeah, that,
I make sure y'all are.
And the November date was, every off year was for legislative stuff, but that's really too late to be talking about that. kind of
Yeah,
stuff
for sure.
in November.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
So I guess if I'm hearing it correctly, there isn't really an action item right now. We're in the November workshop, but probably potentially an agenda item in the future on the big board meeting is putting this workshop policy, potential changes to it. Is that what I'm?
Yeah, or could we leave the policy the same and no, because then.
Well, if the policies we have in workshop.
Yeah.
then-
Yeah.
And you gotta add.
Well, somebody has to have discretion.
I agree.
Whether it's you, executive committee, board as a whole, whatever.
But I think it should be mandatory every 2 years and discretionary in between.
I'm fine with that.
yeah.
Okay, so
That sounds reasonable.
I'll put
we're
that
not
on the
making any
future.
decisions
No, we're not
right
making
now. We're
decisions.
just saying,
Throwing it out there.
would we open this up for?
Well, I make-
For,
Yeah,
make a
I think
motion.
that-
And I
Oh,
think
you have
it
the full
feels-
board
I
right
know what you're
here.
talking about, but if you feel we should have a meeting or a workshop,
Right.
then let's have a workshop.
Right.
I mean, obviously, some people, if they're not available, they're not gonna be here. So,
And the other thing is, you can tell the board in June or whatever it was we had it in, to submit suggestions for anything that's of interest to you that you would like to call for a workshop for
Yeah.
this year.
You know, and maybe we could do that at the end of committee meetings. You know, we always talk about future agenda items, but maybe, you know, we just add the wording workshop in there so that if there's anything that
Yeah.
I feel like Jamie did that.
We did that recently. This past year, we had a sort of an item in every workshop to see if there was any workshop items and kind of compiled them. But you know, there's also, if something comes up and, you know, you need more information, you can always schedule one. Like, it doesn't have to be in November. If you need
Sure.
one any other time of the year, you know, assuming that the rooms are available, well, this is our room. So, I mean, we can work that out. It's just sort of logistics at that point with hotels.
Yeah.
We
I just
still
don't
need to
want to come
notice
when
it.
it's 104, okay?
Oh, that's.
There
I
you
want
go.
to stay in my house.
Somewhere else.
Come to El Paso. So they don't have to-
Yeah, that's the,
That's kind of my.
that's our.
That's also what.
February.
Yeah, y'all could do
February,
fajitas,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
And my ice cream. Oh,
Fajitas in like the alpine-ish area.
Oh, yeah,
No, that's
very
It's easy
popular.
to get in and out of.
Maybe we
Yeah,
can get so that
yeah.
ASC.
Renata, we
grant
need to add to the
I
travel budget.
bet
We're going to
that's-
fajitas.
I think
We
we're
need
taking
to get
notes
that
on
mo-
track. I mean,
Yeah.
meeting
Oh,
outside
that's-
of, off-site.
Yeah,
See?
That's what they do.
that's right.
They have one meeting off-site every year.
who does?
Alpine Trek just started that, yeah, because they got a lot of money.
No.
No. Just because. Oh, okay.
That Scott is a brainiac. He's just so brilliant.
Okay, so we will discuss future workshops, policy, future workshops. And when to schedule them. Very good.
Because we could save some money by not having.
It can go towards our travel.
Yeah,
Fajitas, that's right.
then we can go to Galveston and just meet on the beach.
That's right. The May one we could do.
They are.
Let's just hold it in a bar.
I think you're still, on speakerphone.
Here's the thing I forget in these meetings. Okay, anything else before, and then we will adjourn and see everybody tomorrow?
9 a.m.
Okay, it's 2:36 and we are adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank
Thank you
you.
guys. Yeah.
Thank you.
Have a really good one.